As we have seen, from the idea to the innovation there is a whole path. How can we secure this pathway so that companies do not invest unnecessarily in innovation projects? This is what the Strategeex platform proposes to do, and this is what we will discover through the Trousseau story. You have heard the story of Trousseau, a disposable tableware company that is struggling to get back on its feet. After an innovation challenge, the employees chose 6 projects. However, the company could not carry out all 6 projects at once. It is therefore necessary to structure its innovation portfolio to manage the effort and to manage the allocation of resources. In a previous video, we explained that ideas are channeled through 3 forces. The nature of the innovation, which will condition the risk-taking and ultimately the project management mode. The strategic alignment, because this project must make sense for the company, for the market and on the market. This is what we call strategic alignment. And finally, the maturity of the business model, because if you don't have a solid business model, it will be complicated to succeed on the market. You will find these 3 strengths in the questionnaires select, in the Strategeex platform. Once these questionnaires have been processed, the platform offers you a certain number of deliverables, maps or matrices that are presented and summarized in a complementary sheet. We have presented a certain number of them to you, and I would like to insist on the 3 that seem to us to be the most important to properly manage innovation. First, there is the business model maturity, strategic interest matrix. This involves ensuring that we have a business model that makes sense and that we are aligned with the company's strategic interests. 2 things to watch out for. The first is that you don't have too many ideas on the left side of the matrix, because that would mean that all your innovation projects are completely disconnected from your strategic projects, which is a bit embarrassing. Having said that, it can sometimes be interesting to rely on a project, perhaps for a while, as in this case. In the case of Trousseau, the design project would perhaps allow us to boost the activity a little to generate additional resources to finance the other projects. We can see that the majority, 5 out of 6, are located on the right side of the matrix. That is the most interesting from a strategic point of view. The other thing to look at is that your projects are in fact balanced in the 3 levels of business model maturity. Why is this? Because it means that you can set up a time management system and manage perhaps first what can be implemented quickly. In this case, reusable plate, and then maybe take a little more time to develop a project like auto wash, which is interesting but which is not very mature today. So far, when we talk about business model, we are mostly interested in the maturity of the market and how we will sell our offer. However, we saw in a previous video that it was important to distinguish between the technology portfolio and the innovation portfolio. This is what the brltrl matrix represents. It's about crossing the market readiness of your idea, on the one hand BRL, and on the other hand, the technical maturity of the technology you are going to use, TRL, in column on this diagram. In general, we say that a technology below TRL 6 is too risky to mobilize for a medium-term innovation project. So, for example here, it would not be very appropriate to launch the auto wash plate on the market next week, since the technology for automatic cleaning of the plate in autonomy is not yet available. I remind you that the design project is to design disposable plates by great designers and artists. Here again, we can see that the design project is in the top right-hand corner, because we know how to make disposable plates perfectly and we are addressing a market that we know perfectly well, so there is no risk-taking. What will be interesting is if your innovation portfolio has projects that are located on the diagonal that goes from bottom left to top right. This will allow you, once again, to manage your innovation portfolio over time and make it more dynamic. The last matrix, in fact it's the only one, it's the most important one because it will allow you to make a certain number of decisions. It's the innovation mapping, or activity type, innovation type matrix. It crosses the Ansoff matrix with the nature of your innovation, and the size of the bubbles is the return on investment that you can expect to have. Here, we are going to look at 2 things. First, we are going to be able to identify projects that are very risky and projects that are less risky. So, when you are on the bottom left, you are clearly on a quiet project. You are improving your innovation in a context that you master by addressing a market that you know. This is continuous improvement, there is no major revolution, you can rely on the natural functioning of your company. However, there can be significant cognitive biases in this context, such as, I know my market perfectly. I don't need to go back and ask myself questions. Beware, sometimes you think you know, but you are a little off the mark. The interest here is to work on the business model to make sure that you have the right information up to date. This type of project, at the bottom left, corresponds to what we could call resilience, which allows you to partially revitalize your activity. We are not on the strong transformation. The further up on the right you go, the higher the degree of uncertainty you will have. In fact, the projects that correspond to the column on the right and the top line are projects for which you will have to think about a new team structure, a management style, perhaps even slightly different performance indicators. These are projects for which there are so many uncertainties that you must work in agile mode, short information improvement cycles, and a kind of state of mind, availability, and reactivity. It's not set in stone, but today the more your project is outside your comfort zone, the more you must accept trial and error processes, slightly different performance indicators, and finally a different management. In the case of the Trousseau company, we recommend retaining 3 projects, starting with the connected plate project. Why? Because it is the one that is most inclined and consistent with the company's digital transformation. In this sense, we will be able to work on data processing, technical innovation with sensors that will identify what you are eating, and finally we could even merge it with the auto wash project since, if it also cleans itself, it becomes the perfect plate. It is the one that tells you that you have eaten well, reasonably, seriously, healthy, without damaging the environment. We also recommend keeping the auto wash project because, if the technology is relatively new, we can globally address a market we already know. The last project that we propose to keep, perhaps to develop it in a shorter time, is reusable plate. Why is this? Because it is in fact a question of maintaining a logic of ephemeral tableware, but in a more responsible and sustainable framework, by relying on a market that is a little different from the one we know, with an innovation but with a limited share of risk and finally a return on investment, that will perhaps allow us to finance other projects.